folks. Today we're going to talk about manuscript preparation for submission to a journal. In large part, I'm going to be dealing with the APA style format for your manuscript. And we're going to go through each one of the elements that you'll typically encounter and that you should be attentive to when getting your manuscript prepared. So I'll go over a few areas. One would be your submission letter. Yes, you'll have to prepare one when you submit a manuscript to a journal. It's usually very straightforward. The process of identifying and de-identifying a manuscript for blind peer review. And then just the style and form of the manuscript itself. It's very straightforward. I've encountered students who have thought it to be a stumbling block because they're not really sure about what it's supposed to look like for the submission process. So hopefully this will kind of address some of those concerns, and you'll find out pretty readily that it's a very straightforward process. And after we go through that, I'll talk briefly about, if you haven't already identified a journal, some of the steps you may go through to identify an appropriate journal for your paper. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and go through each one of these items in turn, and hopefully it won't spend too much time, and it will take some of these questions away and send you on your way to submitting manuscript on your own. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to use a paper that recently was submitted and actually accepted and is already in print as an object lesson to kind of go through briefly. So the first thing we're going to talk about is a submission letter. Submission letters are very straightforward. They don't have to be that involved. Kind of scroll down here. Apologize. You'll have your institutional address up here, dated, that kind of thing. You can specify the editor's name, which you would get off the submission site for your journal. And here it's usually involves the content identified in the submission that you would kind of include in your letter. So you're going to identify the title of your manuscript. Elements they usually like to see in a submission letter, excuse me, is that it's an original study and it's not currently submitted to any other outlet or impress anywhere else. So there are some disciplines, for example, law. So when you submit to a law journal, or when you go through a submission site, you can submit to multiple law journals at the same time. That is not the case with criminology and criminal justice. So if you're working on a paper, this one paper can be submitted to one outlet. That's it. And that is the standard for our discipline, and a number of others. But again, I bring up law because there are some exceptions to that. The next thing is that they usually want you to identify is that each author has contributed to the work and agrees to the submission. And then finally, that no conflict of interest exists. Now, if you are working on a grant or you're being paid to do that research, that would be an example of a conflict of interest that you would want to identify, usually in your letter or at the submission site. So here, there were no conflict of interest, and I say there is no conflict of interest. The next paragraph is usually where you talk up your manuscript, that it's providing some new information, that it's addressing some void in the area, that it's got findings that are quite relevant to policymakers, and that it advances the field in some way. So here's where you're presenting your pitch. It doesn't have to be that intense, but you probably want to make that pitch in some manner or form. And then finally, you as the corresponding author, you're going to be very cordial, and you're going to thank them for their time, and then ask them to reach out to you if they have any questions or concerns. And so that's it for a submission letter. Usually once you get into the submission system, so you go to your journal, you go to submit an article, you get to the submission system. In that submission system and the steps, they'll have a place where you can either upload this letter separately, or there'll be a text box where you can copy and paste and insert this information in there, and that will be your submission. So step 1, submission letter. All right. Now we get to the blind peer reviewed part. And they're usually asking you for a title page that's identified and a title page that's de-identified. Now, these would be separate documents. For the purposes here, I've put everything stacked in a single document so that we can seamlessly go through one issue after the next. But for here, we're going to kind of scroll down, and I'm going to show you, I blocked everything out. I have some co-authors. I didn't ask their permission to use their name on here, so I blackened out their names. But you're going to provide the title, your name, your co-author's name, their institutional affiliations. You're going to provide a running head, which is in concert and keeping with APA. So that's just your truncated title. So if you've looked at journal articles before, you'll see at the header on the every other page is basically what that running head is. And this is the suggestion for that running head. And it's got to be short enough to fit there, but it's got to also communicate, you know, the title and content of what your manuscript is about. So it's meaningful in that way. So here's your identified title page. It's not really identified so much here, but you know, you understand that this is the identifiable information that needs to be removed from the manuscript. So this will be a separate title page in its own document. For the purposes here, again, I put it all in one document. And then on the bottom, your institutional address, that you're the corresponding author. And usually they're asking for your ORCID ID. If you don't know what an ORCID ID is, you should look up an ORCID ID and then probably get one. And then what you'll find is your publications will start to hit that ORCID ID, and everything will be, you know, easily consolidated into one place under your name. Anyways, you can look that up and learn all about that another time in another place. The next page here we have is the de-identified. So you see all identifiers removed for double-blind peer review. You'll still have the title, you'll still have the running head, but you'll have no authors or institutional affiliations on it, no information on corresponding authors or anything like that on this page. Just title, just running head. For my purposes, and what I like to do is keep the de-identified title page on the manuscript. And so I like to keep everything together. So I have the identified title page, separate document. And then I have beginning of my manuscript is the de-identified title page flowing into the manuscript. So here we have title page de-identified. The next page would be the abstract. Now, a few notations about the abstract is that it usually has a word limit. So you'll typically see 200 words or less. Not always. Each journal is specific on that. So you'll want to know how many words you have. So here's 180. On this sheet as well will be your keywords. Typically when you're going through the submission system, it's going to ask you for your keywords and to identify them. So that'll be its own separate little thing. So you'll have to look up or find your keywords or add them to it. Each journal is going to be a little bit different. Another thing you want to note about the abstract is sometimes they're structured. So a structured abstract will have the objectives, data used, method, results, you know, in a particular order. I would suggest that you go to the journal, pull a couple of the articles, and then see explicitly how theirs are laid out. In the submission guidelines, they'll usually be very specific about what they'd like to see in that as well. So be attentive to whether it's this more narrative abstract or whether it's a structured abstract. Again, each journal is different, but they'll be very specific about that. Another thing sometimes they ask for is for you to provide names of potential reviewers. sometimes you can pull those from your references to see other people who you've not worked with, but have published in this area and provide names like that, or do a search on your particular topic and see who's published in that area before and provide those names, just to give the editor the ability to, have a starting place on searching for reviewers for your paper. So that's the abstract. I'm not going to comment on content of what your paper should look like. That I'm going to assume that you're already working very diligently on it and you've got it all sorted out. I'm just worried about or concerned with what it actually looks like for your submission. So then we get to after the abstract, you'll have your title again, and then you'll just have your manuscript. Notice that every single thing, including your abstract, is double spaced, right? Here, all your citations are, and again, this is APA style, we're going to be in APA. This will be specified on the submission guidelines for your authors. We go through, you're going to have your normal sections, your introduction, your lit review, your current study, methods, all that business. I want to make comment here that all your headers, your subheaders are going to be in APA. There are certain guidelines for headers and subheaders and what tier they are, whether they're first tier, second tier, third tier, that kind of thing. I want to make comment now on this right here. Insert table 1 about here. Your tables will not be inserted into your manuscript. They will either be appended to your manuscript at the very end after the references, or provided in a separate document as your tables and figures. So here, you're going to enter something akin to insert table 1 about here, wherever you feel that should be. Now, there's no hard and fast rule other than it's more intuitive. I'm commenting on table 1 here. More often than not, table 1 is your variable description table, and it's associated with your data and measures section. So I put insert table 1 about here because it's at the tail end of my discussion about measures. And always remember to reference table 1, table 2, figure 1, whatnot in your manuscript itself. I recently had a conversation with a student who was going through their paper, and I noticed that they hadn't referenced their tables anywhere in the manuscript. They just provided some. So I was like, make sure you do that so that when you're talking about statistics or items or anything, that they can reference back and forth to the table. But again, your tables will not be inserted into the manuscript. They will, again, either be in a separate document or appended to the back end of your manuscript. So another thing I want to comment on is if you have any equations or anything like that, make sure they're accurate and make sure that when you go through the submission site, and it will provide a PDF with everything put together, that your equations are accurate, because sometimes they get like a little tweak or something happens and they're not what was in your Word document, and they get somewhere in the submission process or when it goes to print in that process, some errors happen. So here I'm referencing table 2, and I have another notation here, insert table 2 and figure 1 about here. So I'm gonna go back to the table. You'll see it's still double space. Everything is double space. When we get to references, again, references are double spaced. And then at the back end of your references, you're going to see the tables. and tables are in APA. It might be good for you to, while you're checking out your different potential journals, to, when you pull those articles, to look at the tables and how they're formatted. If you have any questions about what their table formatting looks like in APA and for that journal. Some journals have like an in-house style or a house style. So you want to look at that. So some of the other things you might want to consider about when you do your submission. And what I did was I went to Crime and Delinquency Journal, and just to show you that also on here, submission guidelines. So when you do a search on a journal, you're gonna see they have submission guidelines, and then you go there to follow them. But some of the things you want to consider will be easier for you. You're gonna find that sometimes you're toggling back and forth between your manuscript, because in the submission site, it sometimes will want you to paste in your abstract. So you'll have your document open, you're pasting it in. Frequently, if the journal has a page limit or a word count limit, you'll find out there, you're going to want to make sure you know that information, how many words in your manuscript. They want to know how many tables, how many figures. So it's a good idea to keep all this stuff to the side, so when you're in there, you're prepared. You have everything set to go. More information that you probably want to have on hand. It involves your author, your collaborators' information, co-authors. So if they like to use their middle initial, you should know that. If you should know their institutional address, their emails, have all that stuff right on hand. So when you're in the system, you're not like, oh, geez, I got to go find this information, and that it starts to get pretty tasking. So if you have all your co-author information, you have all your manuscript information, word count, number of tables, all that business, your keywords, so you can easily transfer that stuff in. You can address any queries they have in the system regarding ORCID IDs, that kind of thing. That frequently they'll ask if there's an identifier for the data set that you used. You would probably want to have that information. So if you did use something like the NCVS or NIBRS or something like that, does it have a permanent or website identifier? Sometimes they're asking that because this is scientific research. Somebody might want to use that data and replicate your findings. So all this stuff is good to have on the side when you're going to submission, because more often than not, they're going to want that information. Something that you may also run into is whether or not you have IRB approval. Now, a lot of times in criminology and criminal justice, we're using secondary data that's available and to the public. So it's publicly downloadable data. It is not requiring IRB insofar as it's exempt, that it's not using human subjects or anything like that. So if it's asking you about that, you may or may not want to contact the editor. You can also contact the editor, if you're still shopping for a journal, to see if your topic is appropriate. What I've found is that editors are very open to questions, and they usually answer you pretty readily. The editor information is also on the journal page. When you can look up the editorial board, and they'll tell you who the managing editor is, and their contact information will be on there. So you can usually reach out to them. So I just pulled Crime and Delinquency, but where do you find a journal? One place is that you can quickly look is your references. So you look through your references to see topically what journals are publishing that area that you're in. So I pulled Crime and Delinquency. I saw Crime and Delinquency, a few times. Some of you'll probably want to talk to your major professor. Some of the traditional journals in our field, it's going to depend on tier, or if you believe your manuscript is top tier, mid tier, lower tier. JRCD, you see on here, is Journal of Research and Crime Delinquency, long history in criminology, very traditional top journal, crime and delinquency. There's Justice Quarterly. You get into more specialized journals like Police Quarterly, that kind of thing. So look around your reference section. I'll go to that like screenshot I pasted here of crime and delinquency real quickly. So this is just the main page of crime and delinquency. You'll see again right here, they'll have you click on that, bring you to the submission guidelines, and then there's submission guidelines. Pop right up, and then they have this little button to bring you to the submission site. Right here, link on it, bring you there. But on this page, which it goes down for quite a bit, is I apologize for that. It goes on, quite some distance as you scroll down. It will tell you everything you need to know about submitting to crime and delinquency. So you can, do your own shopping, investigate your topical area, and ask your mentor clearly what, if they have thoughts on it. If they don't, this is how you would go about looking into a journal. Go to your journal, page, the journal you've identified either through a Google Scholar search or through your references, and just start shopping. Look at the aims and scope, see if it topically matches. If you have questions about it, email the editor. Look at some of the manuscripts or articles that they've published, and make your decision from there. See if your topic is a good match for that journal. So with that, let's see. I believe I've covered everything that I intended to cover. APA style, I usually direct students to go to the OWL at Purdue. We're presenting this in APA. Most typically, that's what I've encountered. And most often what I see in criminology, criminal justice, it's very straightforward, double spacing. Another comment I want to make before I close is that you need to edit. I see with a lot of grad students, they tend to make errors that they're used to making in classes when they hand in papers in classes, and that their major professor, if they're working with them as co-author, is taken care of along the way. But that reference section should not have a ton of errors in it. You should not have a ton of errors in the manuscript itself, because the editor is going to see and the reviewers are going to see this person's making errors all over the place. How careful was that research done? So when it comes to getting your manuscript prepared for submission, you need to make sure that you have tried to identify every potential error that is in that paper, because you'll really put yourself behind the 8-ball if you're handing in something or you're submitting something that is just loaded with errors. So you want to please avoid that as much as possible. Have somebody else look at it for you, do what you need to do, but really make sure that you really tightened it up and that it's the best that you can submit it as. So with that, I hope that I've addressed some of your questions. I hope that if the style and content form of your manuscript has served as kind of a stumbling block, that this is kind of dealt with any of those issues. It's very, very simple, straightforward process. This should not be something that's getting in your way of going to that next step of submitting that manuscript. And hopefully this helped clarify that it's a very easy format to conquer. It shouldn't be something that's in your way. So I hope that you've found this useful. If you have any comments, leave them below. If you think anybody can use this information, please go ahead and share, and stay well. Take care. Bye-bye.